Hello, beautiful writers, and welcome to Writing to Reclaim Your Sacred Self, Part 3. And if you are with me now, it means that we have been on a long journey together, and you are enjoying it immensely as much as I am, and I'm so grateful for you. You guys are some of the best pieces of my world right now, and I feel so lucky to have you. And I never want to bring you a lesson that doesn't resonate for me. I never want to just throw something together because it makes sense or just give you something that is inauthentic. And so I have just taken this really amazing journey. I just went to Sceaux, France, and spent a week there. And Sceaux is this very small, beautiful little French village. And it was sort of like the crowning point on a transformation that I've been going through for about a year now. About a year ago, because you've been in this class, I let my house go and I let my job go and I started to travel full time. And it was sort of a process of letting go of my old identity and embracing my new one. And I wasn't sure that was what it was, but I now looking back know that was what it was. But I was trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about this week, and I couldn't figure anything out. And one night, my sister-in-law posted a video which absolutely horrified me. It was a video of a tarantula shedding its exoskeleton, which you'll see because it's part of the lesson. And I was absolutely horrified by it. I hate spiders. I will not kill them. You don't need to write me and tell me what great creatures they are. I know they're great creatures. I know they eat bad insects. I know they make beautiful webs, and they also scare the crap out of me. So I watched this video my sister-in-law posted and was completely just terrorized by it and fell asleep. And I woke up at about 4 a.m. and immediately that video popped into my head, and it occurred to me that what was happening to that spider was a reflection of what had been happening to me over the past year. And so I started to read about what happens when a spider sheds its exoskeleton, why it sheds its exoskeleton, what the dangers are of shedding its exoskeleton. And I found out that spiders cannot grow unless they shed their exoskeletons. Their exoskeletons are hard and they don't grow like the human bones do. They just stay the same size. So if a spider doesn't shed that old exoskeleton and bring forth a new one, he will, one, he won't grow anymore, and two, he'll die. And a spider often becomes very lethargic and depressed right before it sheds an old skeleton because it takes an incredible amount of work and energy to be able to manufacture a new exoskeleton and then push off the old one. And if the spider does not achieve the skin shedding that he's trying to achieve within a certain amount of time, he'll die in the process. It's a very dangerous process. And so I started thinking about the ramifications of that, if you think of it as a metaphor for what happens to us when we decide to shed, not decide, I don't even know that we logically decide. I think we begin to shed an old identity, whether we like it or not, and then we can either choose to embrace it or we can cling to the past. And my identity, much of my identity, was based on being a groupie. And that sounds very silly and not profound, but that was an identity that produced some of the most profound things that have ever happened to me. I wrote most of my books while I was on the road following rock bands. I discovered who I was. I had these incredibly profound spiritual experiences at rock shows. So no matter what else I let go of, I just could not imagine letting go of being a groupie. And after I sold my first novel and my first poetry book, I started really living the life of a writer. I would go out and I would do speaking engagements and I would go to writer parties, and I was meeting all of these amazing artists that were really on the same wavelength as I was, and talking about literature and just having the time of my life. This amazing new identity was emerging, but I was still running away from this and running back to being a groupie, even though that had become something that wasn't serving me as much. There were hierarchical structures within that community that could be really oppressive and abusive at times, and I was old, my body was tired. It wasn't as much fun when you're 44 to stand at the front of a rock show and dance as it was when you're 24. And I just felt like I was like clinging to this thing that used to be who I was because I was afraid to find out who I was now. And as the universes want to do, because I wouldn't spread my wings, she decided to kick me the hell out of the nest. And so some really ugly things happened within that scene that made me come face to face with the fact that that was not who I was anymore and that wasn't my home anymore. And it was at a show when this happened. A dear friend of mine, who's also the guitarist of the band that I followed, kind of told me some of the horrible things people were saying about me, which I'm incredibly grateful to him for doing. But I decided to leave. I decided this is not who I am anymore. And so I wrote him a letter and I thanked him for always being kind to me. And I told him that I was done, that I was going to embrace something new now, that I had all of these other wonderful possibilities waiting for me. And I was going to let go of my past and embrace my future. And it was incredibly painful for me to do that. But I pushed send on the message and I drove away from the venue where I had been watching the show. And as I was pulling out, I got a letter from Elizabeth, who runs the center here, offering to let me teach other classes for her, which basically doubled my income within the course of a conversation. I got an email saying that an article about me that was about my identity as a writer was coming out in a magazine that day. I hadn't expected it to come out for months. And then within a few weeks, I ended up selling another novel. And finally, after all of these miraculous things that happened, helping me to embrace this new identity, a dear writer friend of mine who happens to have a house in Sauve invited me to come and spend a week with her there. And now there is a possibility that I will move to Sauve for a while because it just felt so right. It felt like by finally doing the hard work of ejecting this old identity, I opened the door for something really beautiful to come into my life. And so I wanted to talk to you guys about that process today because I think it's something we all go through. We go through it many times in life. It's not just the shedding of a marriage or the shedding of a job. It's the shedding of an entire identity. And it happens when you go from being a child to being a teenager, or from being a teenager to being a young woman. And for me now, it has happened as I've gone from being a young woman, and my identity was very much tied up in my identity as a groupie, my identity as a young woman, to being a middle-aged woman who is not a groupie anymore, who is a writer. And I want you to think about the process of shedding an identity. And if you are going through that sort of process, what are the ramifications of deciding not to grow? Like a spider does. If a spider decides not to grow, it dies. So what are the ramifications of holding on to old identities that don't serve you anymore? And what freedoms are possible if you decide to take the cues that the universe is giving you and let go of the past and embrace the future? So I hope you enjoy this lesson. I know I enjoyed writing it. There are some fun parts to it. There's some funny parts to it. There's some serious parts to it. I can't wait to see what you write. I always enjoy reading what you write. And again, you are one of the best parts of my world, and I do see the God in you. Namaste.